Hi, thanks for joining us for today's webinar, Practical Solutions for Everyday IT Challenges. Just a few things to go over before I hand over to the guys from Action 1. The webinar has been recorded. We'll get that shared tomorrow. The feedback survey will be live on the portal at the end of the webinar. Please do share as much information as you can on there. I've got the presentation already, so we'll share that when the recording goes live. There's no chat as usual. We do have the Q&A, so if you have any questions, drop them in the Q&A. They'll either be picked up as we go along or they'll be answered at the end. That's it from me. Thanks again for joining us. I'm going to hand over now to Drew from Action 1.
Perfect. Thank you very, very much, Rick, for the introduction. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you all for taking the time out to join us. So my name is Drew, and I look after our education business here at Action 1. I'm also joined by my colleague, Sean, who's one of our lead technical engineers. Sean will be leading most of today's session, walking you through a little bit of the platform, some presentation with regards to everyday IT challenges, and answering as many technical questions as we can fit in today's discussion. Today's session is all about how Action 1 is going to help educational institutions streamline patch management, improve security posture, and eliminate the manual overhead of keeping systems up to date. We know how challenging it can be to manage fairly distributed devices with limited resources, limited budgets, and limited time. And that's exactly a problem that we're helping a lot of customers in our education industry solve today. We're going to start with a quick presentation, an overview of Action 1, and we'll then dive into a live demo led by Sean, and we'll wrap up with some Q&A. I would ask, please do feel free to drop any questions in the chat throughout the session. We'll try our best to answer those today. And if we're not able to at all, then I will reach out. I'm more than happy to reach out. If you can just please pop that into the feedback at the end of today's session, you'll hear from me very, very shortly. With that, let's get started. Sean, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Drew. Let me share my screen here and we will begin. Okay, fantastic. So, as Drew said, we're going to be looking at practical solutions for everyday IT challenges. This presentation is a little bit different in that as we go through our agenda here and going through the common challenges and IT manager requests, we're actually going to be going back and forth between the PowerPoint and the console itself. So it keeps things a little more interactive, a little more engaging, which of course is going to coincide with talking about the actual capabilities and different resources we also have to help you get the most out of Action 1, right? We have a variety of different links and just general knowledge centers that we offer. And then as Drew mentioned, of course, just to reiterate, please ask questions at any point in time during today's presentation. We're going to try to get to those as soon as they appear to make sure we can get those questions all answered. Okay, let's see here. We'll move forward. And first place we'll start is, we kind of like to lay some general groundwork about what people typically think the day in the life of an IT manager / admin is, right? Because we're trying to tackle every challenges. Some people look at this and like, okay, you're just working tickets, you're working some more tickets, you're getting some coffee, you're doing more tickets, getting lunch, and you're really just doing calls and tickets all day. When in reality, when we actually look at what the life of an IT admin is like, and I can speak from personal experience, it's far more chaotic, right? There's much more going on. You might be able to squeeze in some time for lunch and a coffee, but in reality, you're doing many different things all at once, right? So we might be doing some troubleshooting. Of course, as we all know, troubleshooting can spiral off in many different directions, right? You might need to be doing things around hardware-based troubleshooting, network-based troubleshooting, software-based troubleshooting. There can be many different things at play, and then all of a sudden you're being pulled aside to do some type of scripting for automation, and then you have to double back and look at your tickets. There's a lot to juggle, right? It's not as easy as the initial first slide we looked at would make it seem. There's plenty of things going on, and of course, depending on your role, it can be even more than what's being described on the slide that we see here. So again, as you mentioned, our hope is to be able to ideally take some of that pain away. And if we look at our first slide here and our list of challenges that we see is really kind of meant to be more of a initial base layer, is the idea of creating strong endpoint grouping processes. And by having multiple groups in place, like spread across, a variety of unique hardware configurations, software configurations, environmental configurations, we're able to do things along the lines of patching and various other management aspects in just a much more concrete way, right? We're not having to find every endpoint every single time. So if we kind of go over and take a look in the Action 1 console for that, and we switch over our share here, we can kind of discuss how that is handled via Action 1. So by going into the Action 1 console, we can see here that we have already quite a few groups in my environment here from test instance, but we'd like to kind of describe how these are designed to work. So by creating new groups in the console here, we are essentially able to go in, of course, give those groups a name, give them a description, and then really where we try to make this as easy as possible is through the idea of dynamic grouping. Instead of having to take endpoints manually, take an allocation, bring them over into a group and rinse and repeat for however many endpoints it is that you manage, the goal ultimately is instead to identify common criteria. And we have a large list here that you can choose from. And then Action 1 will automatically group based off set criteria. So we'll go in and say, actually, I want to just grab everything in my AD OU of accounting, right? Let's bring those all into my group. Or maybe I want to do the security group instead, right? Okay, I have a certain security group I want to grab. Let's insert this. Or maybe you want to instead do things like IP address ranges. Maybe you have certain VLANs that you're using to segment out your environment. Maybe you have certain computer labs in certain VLANs, right? Or certain classrooms in certain VLANs. That might be a good way to segment out. Or maybe you're doing certain naming conventions for the endpoints, depending on their purpose, right? So you could do something like, a wildcard statement to help collect those systems all into one logical group. And with Action 1, you can, basically use filter logic via and/or statements as well to kind of pick and choose what is going to be grouped based off the criteria that you are presenting Action 1. Now, with the criteria that we're seeing here, keep in mind, you can fairly easily create your own as well. We have an area here called custom attributes, where you can essentially create your own custom attribute criteria and then use PowerShell queries to populate those attributes. So as long as PowerShell can query it, you can turn that into an attribute. And if you want to go even further beyond that, you can actually use our API to insert information as well. So it's very flexible. Now, in the event that the custom criteria that we discussed does not meet the needs that you're trying to achieve, you always do have the option to go into a group directly and simply add endpoints in. And you can do that via a just general browse function through the console or by importing a CSV list, of course. So if you already have an outside tool that you want to use that is difficult to bring that data into Action 1 for some reason, CSV is thankfully generally always an option. So that's an option you can make use of as well. Okay, let's switch over to our next slide in question here. So the next slide we're looking at is the idea of downtime, right? It's difficult to get buy-in from every team member possible to find time to get things done, right? In a lot of instances. Thankfully, in education, it can be maybe a little easier than a truly 24/7 operation. But there are still elements of education where things do need to be up at all times, right? So one of the main pain points we see is, the idea of doing automatic patch deployments. And maybe when we say downtime, it's not in the traditional sense from an education standpoint, but it's more how can we catch these devices when they are up, right? Because they might not be up all the time. So when we talk about how that is handled within Action 1, we're essentially going to be looking at the way to make sure patches are applied very quickly and within the hours that you want those to be deployed. So if we go back into our console here and switch back over to our Action 1 instance, we're going to be able to kind of talk about how Action 1 handles the scheduling process, how we're able to make sure that those updates are being deployed in a timely manner, and really just make sure that you're running into as few of issues as possible. So when we look at, say, a device that I have listed here, right, missing updates, and we see the patches here, and everything we're about to discuss, right, this is for a single system, but we are going to discuss this at a wider scale, as well around like creating update automations also. But for the sake of the scheduling discussion, I can pick one update, for instance, 1Password as an example, and say deploy. When I load this in through Action 1, it'll show me the information I have. And then I can say next, I can target my device, and I can choose to run this requested item. Now, of course, I can pick specific times. This is all fairly straightforward, right? I can choose to make this a recurring function if I wanted to, but for a singular deployment, it's fine to have this run one time. Now, the big thing that we're going to be able to kind of work around, at least from a, making sure updates are installed standpoint, is that we have this miss retry window / maintenance window element. So essentially, Action 1 is going to ask us, okay, we can run this patch, but we can also tell Action 1 how long we can attempt to run something for. So essentially, I could extend this range to whatever time frame I want. It could be 24 hours, it could be 24 days, it could just be 5 days. And if my endpoint for some reason is not reachable during this time frame, as long as it comes online within this time frame, it will still receive the update. Basically making it so that regardless of when I scheduled this process, in the event that a device is not online, it's in a downtime state, right? Even when it comes back online, it's still going to receive those patches. We're not going to be missing anything. And this same setting applies, as we start talking more about update automations, it will apply to our update automations as well, that we create across large selections of systems and then have these run on a reoccurring basis. So we can essentially ensure that even if we run these within a very tight time frame, and maybe we have some endpoints that are outside of that time frame, they're not going to be missed. This way, we're really just kind of making sure that, again, we're keeping our updates up to date, we're maintaining security, and we're spending less time hunting down these devices, spending less time getting the okay on sign off for a lot of these instances, and making sure that things are being done correctly. And the other piece to keep in mind as well is when it comes to downtime is the idea of reboots as well. Action 1 does have an automatic reboot function where you're actually able to give the end user a set amount of time before the reboot will occur. So you're kind of passing off that reboot responsibility to an extent to the end user. But this isn't an example of them basically putting it off forever because this time frame acts as a timeout. At the end of this timeout window that you set here, Action 1 is going to make sure that those systems are being rebooted. So that way they're not pending those updates for days or months or even years in the event that the user never reboots their device. So there's lots of options in how this works, and we will talk about this in more detail as we move forward. But let's cycle back to our PowerPoints here, and then we can dive into the next slide. Okay, the next challenge that we often see from various IT admins is the idea of end-of-life software, end-of-support software, if you will, as well. Very common, right? I think if you've been an admin for some time in multiple environments, you will run into end-of-life software or software that is approaching end-of-life. And there's two ways to look at that, right? Of course, there is the idea of third-party software that is end-of-life, and there's the idea of Windows operating systems that are end of life. And both have their own, unique set of challenges, right? Obviously Windows OSs, depending on what type of Windows era we're talking about, can be more difficult than others to do the upgrade process. But with third-party software, this is also an area of concern. There can be a lot of elements that come into play, especially with third-party software. Depending on the end-of-life status of said software, that's going to actually really greatly change how we approach it. Some end-of-life software, it's just as simple as contacting the vendor and saying, hey, I need to upgrade to the latest version. They say, okay, we can help you out with that. But in some instances, we actually need to start talking about, okay, how do I switch to a different software application entirely, right? And Action 1 has quite a few different tool sets that can help kind of overcome some of these challenges. And we're going to look at it from the standpoint of third-party software, and then from a standpoint of Windows operating systems. Specifically, right now, I would say around the idea of a Windows 10 to 11 upgrade process in particular. So let's transition back to our console and discuss in more detail how we're going to go about that. So as we switch over here, let's start with the idea of third-party applications. So with third-party apps, usually the first thing we want to do is ideally do an audit, right, of the applications that we have in our environment. And of course, if you don't have the appropriate set of tools to conduct this can be a pretty daunting task. Thankfully, Action 1, we have an area here called installed software that shows you every piece of software in your environment. So it then becomes quite simple to simply go through and say, okay, what software is installed, right? I'm able to get this bird's eye view of everything in my instance in my Action 1 environment. And from here, I can even click on these instances and see, okay, what endpoints have this installed? And to even go further beyond that, again, talking about end-of-life software, If it's end-of-life software, we actually want to uninstall it. For instance, like maybe there's older editions of FlashPlayer or Silverlight or something like that existing in your environment. You could just find that here in Action 1, select it, and actually tell Action 1 to just uninstall that software at scale across every device. And that's one very valid way to handle end-of-life software, where it's not actually needed in my environment anymore. So why should I have it? Rather than going to each device individually or working through group policy, which to be fair can be time consuming, it can be hit or miss if you have remote endpoints, things like that. I can instead just tell Action 1, hey, let's actually target a specific version, or we can target just all versions of that software if we want to be very broad. And then run this against every device in my environment to ensure that this is being cleaned up in a just quick and decisive manner. And if I want, I don't even necessarily run it one time. I could make this a reoccurring function as well. So if that software ever gets reinstalled, it's taken off the devices. So this way we're getting rid of that end-of-life software, which inherently is generally quite vulnerable, right? There's a lot of vulnerabilities to that software. Now, in the other instance of end-of-life software, sometimes that can come down to having to push out a new version of that software. Generally speaking, that's going to be done through our software repository section. So here we're going to actually be able to see a large collection of software that we provide just out of the box, where I can simply select that software until I actually want to deploy the latest version of that software. This can make that very simple to get that software pushed out at scale, especially after removing it in that instance. And if you want, you can add your own custom software into the Action 1 console, making that package process quite easy and deploying that out as needed. And that is a quite simple process to do as well. And we'll talk about that in more depth in a moment. Now, if we take the thought process of Windows as an end-of-life software itself, that's another area you want to consider, especially with Windows 10 very quickly reaching end of life here in is it October or September? I always forget. I believe October. And as such, we have a lot of admins out there that are rushing to try to either A, upgrade their devices to Windows 11, or B, replace devices, right? And we're going to give you actually two different tools to kind of go after that piece. One is we're going to give you a very easy way to actually just do the upgrade. So you can go into Action 1 and you can simply go to the final page here in our repository, and you're going to see Windows 10 to 11 upgrade functionality is built right into Action 1. So I can select this package, I can say deploy, and I can choose next, and I can then target what devices I want to push this out to. I can pick individual systems, or I can pick a group that's showing certain agents that I want to target against. But essentially, once I deploy this package, we're going to do the various compatibility checks. We're going to be running against those various, as a TPM module, things like that, and then deploying out that upgrade process. And of course, run this after hours. It takes quite a bit of time. But then that's no longer something you have to go to each device individually and do. It's a fully automated process through Action 1 that you can just deploy out at scale. So it makes that very, very easy. And of course, you'll get information pushed back to you telling you which ones were compatible, which ones weren't, which can be important because if we consider the second element of the current issue of upgrading to 11, sometimes you need to replace your systems as well. Sometimes there's no way that these devices can handle Windows 11 from a hardware functionality standpoint. And the area that Action 1 can help there is actually through what we call custom reporting. So we can generate for you a full Windows 11 upgrade compatibility report, where we can tell you, what is compatible, what's not compatible, and we'll actually give you the entire reason why you're seeing those issues. And the way you do this through Action 1, it's a little more complicated than just going to a built-in report, but it's still very approachable. Quite simply, we have a collection of custom reports in our GitHub catalog, where you can simply go in and quickly say, actually, I want to go and grab a listing of what systems are able to be upgraded. I can take this script right here, and we're essentially going to save this as a data source within Action 1. So we go data sources. This is basically the backbone to Action 1's reporting. And I can click new here, and I can then create a custom data source that will then be able to be turned into a report. And we can see I already have one of these here. I can go in and I can click custom, and I can see this information right here that I can then begin to load that script in and then test against whatever endpoint I want to then bring that data in. And then again, I would add as a custom report, and I can then take that data and report on that and identify what systems do I need to be looking to fully replace, or which ones can I upgrade. Okay, let's switch back over to our PowerPoint doc here. Okay, we'll move on to number 3. Okay, manual installations. So anytime that we want to deploy third-party software, we actually kind of touch base on this a little bit. It's difficult to do that at scale, right? If you have over 1,000 endpoints, 10,000 endpoints, 5,000 endpoints, it's going to be very, very difficult to do those in bulk unless you have some kind of automation tool that's going to help with that process. And we showcased already in the Action One console that you can do that just through built-in software. And if we go back into our repository here, just to kind of give another look into that area and talk about custom software deployment more. Again, we have our own built-in packages. We maintain these for you. So whenever a new version comes out, we're going to make sure that you have the latest version of any software application here, where you can simply just go in, select software, and say deploy. That's really all you have to do, as we showed earlier. But what you can also do that we alluded to was the idea of doing a custom software deployment. So by clicking add to repository here, I can add this software into the Action One repo. I can then basically from this point forward, maintain multiple versions over time. So I can tell Action One I want to, have a particular version here, and then I upload the next version as it comes out, and so on and so forth. And I can even deploy out the old version in the event there's something actually wrong with the new version. But to do this software deployment function, I am going to simply identify what software I want to push out. I want to tell Action One what the version number is and the display name match field is. This allows Action One to basically take the software you upload into the console and not only make it available for deployment, but make it appear as a missing update for all of your devices as applicable. And what we're looking for here, simply click this little question mark. We're looking for just the display name and the version that you would see in apps and features. Now, in order to get the software actually into the console, we're simply going to identify is it a 32-bit, 64-bit, and then upload into Action One. So from here, we'll be able to very clearly tell Action One, here's our software. We can support the 32 gigabytes per package upload. So it's quite substantial in terms of the size of software that we can support. And you can upload full zip archives as well. And then we also make use of peer-to-peer distribution to minimize how much bandwidth is being consumed by these deployments. Because of course, if you're pushing a 30 gig file out to 1,000 devices, that's a lot of data. So we want to minimize that, and we do just that via the peer-to-peer function in Action One. Very high level, how that works is each LAN is going to basically be its own peer-to-peer segment. The Action One agents, when they realize they need a piece of software, will communicate with the other agents, see who else needs it, and they'll all download small chunks of that data, share those chunks until they have a full download. And essentially, when you look at total bandwidth overhead, we're looking at maybe like one download and a little bit of extra in terms of the actual amount of bandwidth being consumed, thanks to the P2P solution that Action One has. Then from here, we would specify what our silent install switches are. So I can put the other ones here. And then assuming these are correct based off the command line preview, I can simply hit save and that software is ready for deployment. I can also add in my own MSI switches as well. So I can hit save there, and that will basically initiate that deployment process as needed. You can also do this for Mac OS as well, of course, and Linux will be coming later this year. If you want, you can also add in additional functions within the console where you could say, okay, after installing this software, or maybe even before, I have a dependency. So I want to actually install Java prior to pushing out my software. So there's extra flexibility that you can use within the Action One console. So as I do this before install, I could run a script. You can run scripts through Action One as well. And I could run this script, before install. I could then layer that in with a, full update deployment, which we will talk about in detail as well. But you can, again, add in additional automations to make this just a more robust push, because some software applications are going to have additional functions. And again, if we can take as many manual steps out of the equation as possible, we're going to be saving everybody time in the long run, which is nothing but a win as far as I'm concerned. From there, we can go into our PowerPoint presentation again, where we can go to our next challenge. Vulnerability tracking, right? When we are looking through our list of vulnerabilities, it can be difficult to identify how to prioritize what I'm seeing in my environment, but it can also be difficult to, fully go through and start remediating these various vulnerabilities for multiple reasons, right? If you already have a vulnerability scanning tool in your organization, you're usually only going to be getting data as to what's wrong, but not actually how to fix those things, which can be painful to track down, to research into the vulnerability, identify the CVE, identify what needs to be done to fix it, grab the proper files, so on and so forth. It's a long process. And then also just being able to see that information in general, if you don't have a scanning tool, it can be very difficult as well. So action one is going to give you the functionality to be able to essentially go in and see from the vulnerability section here, every CVE that's in your environment that correlates to OS-based vulnerabilities, and then also third-party based application vulnerabilities. We always have to clarify, we're not looking at database configs, Active Directory configs, anything like that. We're really just strictly focusing on operating system and third-party patching. But the reason we do that is we're able to provide very clear, concise data as to what's going on. So I can click on this vulnerability, for example, see the endpoint, see what's vulnerable, see what software is vulnerable, and get details around that vulnerability. And with this information, either through the details tab here, by identifying is it applicable to ransomware or some other information maybe I get from the NIST link here, I can prioritize, or I can prioritize based off things like CVSS score, finding them more applicable and worrisome. Of course, it's a perfect 10, probably want to get that one taken care of as soon as possible. Or I can go based off the value of CISA KEV. KEV essentially stands for known exploited vulnerability. This basically means that if it says yes in this value column, that vulnerability has been used by threat actors to initiate some kind of hack or intrusion into the environment, and it was reported back as saying this is a problem, and you probably want to remediate this right away because that means there is a known proof of concept out there on how to use this vulnerability. Now, again, we mentioned previously that one of the biggest pain points around vulnerability remediation is, how can I actually remediate, right? When I'm getting a list of vulnerabilities from my scanner, I need to be able to take steps to actually perform actions to fix those things. So I can tell action one to the console that actually I want to select a couple of vulnerabilities here. I can go these three, say start remediation. And if we are aware of the particular fix, the update needed to correct this vulnerability, I can just tell action one to go after that right away. It'll basically load in, say, let's deploy updates to fix this. I can say next and target every device and just run. And that will remediate that vulnerability for me, honestly, among many others, because this is likely tied to many other CVEs, not just this one particular one we're looking at. Now, I can also uninstall software through action one for this section as well. And then if you need to, you can also do what we call a compensating control, where you document steps you took to mitigate a vulnerability, because not all vulnerabilities are going to be as simple as applying a patch, unfortunately. Sometimes they require very specific changes and adjustments to your environment or the program itself, which you would want to document here. Now, the other piece that I think is very important in terms of tracking vulnerability information is the dashboard right here. One thing that we hear time and time again when it comes to the various customers that we work with in the education space in the UK is we're all trying to get to our Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus standing. We're working towards that. And either that or trying to maintain it, of course. And one of the key identifiers, of course, is having the appropriate SLAs in place, right? So that way the team as a whole can make sure they're aware of, okay, are we within compliance or outside of compliance? And you can configure those here in action one based around vulnerabilities and update deployment compliance as well. So you can basically tell action one, okay, here's my standard timeframes that I'm working with within my console here. And then if you're overdue outside of scope in regards to compliance, again, looking at Cyber Essentials as the main contender there, we can very easily see, oh, I'm overdue on 27 critical updates based off the compliance standards I'm trying to adhere to. Let me click on these. Here's every single vulnerability that is a problem in my environment that is outside of compliance. Let's do a direct remediation against that. Same thing can be said for updates. If I have critical patches that are overdue, I can click right here, see every single patch that is overdue, again, outside of compliance, outside of my Cyber Essentials timeframe, And I can simply say, let's just install these right now. Let's get these over with, or I can schedule them for a later point in time, or at the very least, they're being brought to my attention so I can go back to the team at large and make a game plan to get these remediated. So very, very important for a lot of our customers in the education space. Okay, let's go over into our next slide. And Drew, are there any questions that we should maybe be addressing at this point in time? Or are we okay on that end?
No questions so far. I've addressed the couple that we've had. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's talk about remote access. Depending on your size, right, you might already have a remote tool in place, or you might not have anything, or at the very least you want a backup option. In this case, it can be far more manual. You're going through RDP, you're not even doing full screen share in most instances, and this can just be kind of a pain, quite honestly. So that's one kind of way you can look at the idea of remote access. The other way is you can look at it more from a standpoint of just being able to perform remote functions, which since Action 1 is cloud-based, we can perform, again, the software deployments, the vulnerability remediations, the scripting functions, all those things. And updates in general are going to be a part of that as well. So if we talk about remote access in the literal term, we can view that real quick. Just take a look at that. Go into the Action 1 console. This will be a very quick slide, but that's okay. We can see via the endpoint section here, we can just simply select remote access. And Action will allow us to do a remote connection to be able to do a screen share with the end user. If no one's logged into this device, you'll be brought to the login screen where you can then do a remote control access session with that end user. Once you log in, you'll be able to see their desktop and see everything that they see on their side, right? It appears I forgot my password. But basically, this is going to allow you to do a variety of troubleshooting steps, right? It's going to be able to assist with any updates that may not be performing the way we want, and kind of give you that extra manual touch, right? Okay, let's dive into our next slide there. Okay, lack of visibility. So we have talked about this one in a fair bit of depth, but we just want to reiterate this. Visibility is really key to the information that you're going to be able to kind of pull out of your environment, right? If you're not able to see every device, every potential missing update, every vulnerability, you're not going to know they're there. And as such, you're going to be exposed. You're going to be vulnerable. One way I always describe it is, let's say you're aware of 99% of your devices in your environment, but there's 1% that you have just lost track of for some reason. It's in a closet somewhere. Those devices could potentially just be getting more and more and more vulnerable as time goes on, as more CVEs are identified for the software on that device. And this makes us more vulnerable to potential security breaches. So we really want to make sure we're prioritizing that. Again, we talked about the vulnerability section. That's going to be a key place to do that. But you also need to make sure that the Action 1 agent in that instance is installed on every device in your environment. An installation can be done through group policy. It can be done through some other deployment tool that you have. We have our own deployer tool as well that you can use to kind of increase that overall visible scope to, again, make sure that you're not missing anything. Okay, let's talk about reporting a little more in depth. So we kind of touched base very slightly on that, but in general, real-time reporting can be a very big pain point for a lot of organizations. So with Action 1, all our reporting is in real time. So it's not going to be based off scan intervals like a lot of tools. You don't have to worry about scheduling anything. When you view a report, you're getting up-to-date data, and you're going to be able to see exactly what's going on, especially when it comes to patch deployments or just reporting in general. And if we take a look at the Action 1 console, we can kind of demonstrate what that looks like. If I go in and I take, say, an endpoint here, I have this particular system. I can take a relatively small update, such as Notepad++. I can say next here, and we'll just run this and see what we get in terms of feedback to kind of see how that's going to execute. So if I say run now, we're going to find that Action 1 again strives to give real-time information whenever possible. That's always the goal. So when we view these areas in the console, we can expand the history section. Again, this is accessible here. We can see this started basically immediately. There was little to no delay. And now we're getting a direct real-time breakdown of everything that's occurring in Action 1. And this is for that particular update deployment. And as we've seen here, it's going through, it's installing. Ideally, everything will install as we would expect, right? And it just did. And we can see from the time I started that update push the time to finish, it was a matter of a minute, probably less than a minute, quite honestly. And again, that was all real-time data. In fact, if we go and look at some prior deployments that I have done within my console here, we can take a look at like this particular instance. Actually, it's a bad example. Which one was it again? This one right here. And we're going to get a variety of different things. We're going to be able to see, again, successes that I ran across multiple devices for my update ring, which we're going to talk about at the end of today's presentation. But we can also see here, errors, right? This is a common reality, right? We're not going to say you'll never see errors when you're pushing out updates. Things can happen, like not enough disk space, right? And we will give you a very detailed breakdown of what has occurred there. If there's error codes that you need to be concerned about, you will see those in Action 1. And then you can also very simply go to this history section and simply say, show me which one's errored. Okay, here's every errored device. Here's all the information that you need. This is kind of foreshadowing for update rings that we'll talk about here in a moment. But essentially, we're going to also be able to show you deployment statistics as well in the console. So that's a part of the equation as well. That'll give you real-time data as to how that deployment is going. Going back to the reports that we mentioned, all of the reports in Action 1 as well are real-time in scope. So we can see here, it does a query. It says it did a few seconds ago. Everything here is basically going out, requesting the endpoint data via those PowerShell queries that we discussed previously and showing that information here in the console. Same thing can be said for hardware data. If this box is blue, that's a live response. I'm pulling correct data there. Patching, of course, is again one of the biggest areas of focus. So we're going to be showcasing all of these different pain points here in terms of what patches are currently missing. I can click in here, again, getting live data on this piece and showing me all this information. And again, you can export this out of Action 1. You can also subscribe to these reports and have them sent via email as needed. Other reports that we can pull, things like low disk space, what systems of mine are low on storage. Again, real-time data. Same with Windows services, which services are up or not running. This is all information that's just built into the console out of the box. And through that, you should be able to make more informed decisions. And if you're working with out-of-date data, you're kind of hoping what you're about to do is fully accurate and up-to-date. But with Action 1, we should be able to get fully up-to-date information. Or if the endpoint's offline, it would be cached. But regardless, it's going to be as relevant as possible to the current situation at hand. We talked about different compliance pieces as well. We really kind of hit on the major one, which is going to be that Cyber Essentials element. Drew, is there anything else you want to add on that component?
Yeah, over time, right, we've seen an increased focus with regards to compliance and being on top of vulnerabilities, especially in the education sector. Year on year, we're seeing more guidance coming from DFE. We're seeing a lot more guidance coming from the trust handbooks and other kind of documentation with regards to improving compliance around vulnerabilities specifically. So I guess the relevant one, exactly, you've hit the nail on the head there, Sean. It's going to be Cyber Essentials in line with those DFE requirements. But again, there's other areas that Action 1 can help with regards to compliance as well. Understanding things like assets, understanding what installed software you've got, understanding, the vulnerabilities, right? The elephant in the room here. But there's, again, a variety of different ways. And again, really focusing on that point that you made earlier, Sean, with regards to the reporting and the capabilities of the Action 1 reporting console. You could essentially report on anything you would like to, as long as it is configurable or you're able to script it via PowerShell query. So we can fetch all of that data and really support towards compliance guidelines and thresholds.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll second everything Drew said there. And again, based off what we showed previously, we're really going to help you get to that point where you need to be. And we have helped many education institutes get to that point as well. Okay, let's talk about number 10 here, patch rollouts. So this is the big elephant in the room. We're going to quickly go over how we can automate those processes, kind of taking in everything that we've already discussed and how kind of all that pieces together to make it so you can just go in and start automating your patches with a few extra tools in your tool belt. So if we go and share my screen here, we can see that we want to probably go to our automation section first. This is where patch rollouts are going to be orchestrated through the console. Essentially, Action 1 allows for the creation of update rings. And for those who are not familiar with the update ring concept, the idea is that you start with update ring 0 you deploy out updates. That update deployment success rate then determines if updates will be deployed to the next group in line. And then that will then determine the next group in line. Essentially, we're doing intelligent checks on our deployments before doing our next level of deployments. So that way we're making sure that things are working correctly before moving forward. So that way we're going to be running into less issues as we push patches out through the console. Now, what we're going to normally recommend is taking that grouping knowledge that we talked about previously, creating our patching group A, B, C, D, testing, production A, production B, whatever you want to call it. We can then target those with automations. And by doing a new automation function, update ring, we can then create our first update ring 0. And essentially what we're going to want to do here is target the kind of patches that we want to deploy. Action 1 is going to allow us to basically say, do you want to push out third-party applications, operating system updates? This is all done through the filter selection, by the way. So I can pick and say, let's do all third-party apps. Let's do Windows updates. Let's exclude drivers. These are all ways we can create this. We could do a filter around critical severity patches. We can really pick and choose how we want to cater our deployment, right? If I wanted to, I could even just say, actually, I only want to do, Firefox in this instance, wrap it in wildcard symbols, and Chrome and just do browsers, right? Something like that. But in general, we're going to have the control of how this is supposed to be pushed. Now, you have two options when it comes to determining how updates are. You're going to have to be automatic in terms of deployment. So that's what this flag does right here. Basically looks at this filter. It says, hey, if this is a third-party app, I'm just going to install it. That's all you have to worry about. It's very simple, very straightforward. But if you want to have a little more control, you can put in delay windows since the release of the app, or you can do what we call manual approval as well. This is more common for Windows updates and for server patching, but it allows us to go into update approval, select the updates that we want to work with, say approve or decline. When you do these approvals, you are able to scope those in based off organization structures, and we can highlight that a little bit if we have time. But this allows us to choose exactly what systems are receiving those updates, or we can decline patches. In this way, those updates are never offered to any of those devices at all.
Sean, can I step in there?
Of course.
Just with regards to the approval processes, right? This is going to be really, really relevant to the members on today's call who are managing collections of schools or trust managers.
Mm-hmm.
There may be particular schools within your trust that you may not want specific updates going out to. And equally so, you may want, the majority of the schools to receive those updates. So that approval per organization can be hugely valuable, especially for centralized teams.
Yeah, no, spot on. That it really is what it comes down to, because you can have those different organizations with different locations, different schools. And each organization, by the way, when you create these, done through here, you can pick that org, you can choose what users have access to these organizations. So if you want to restrict technician access to only one school or one element of the trust, you can do that. And then when you actually go into these orgs, each org has its own endpoints, its own groups, its own vulnerabilities, its own dashboard. They're all segmented areas. And then Drew hit the nail on the head in that you'll be able to then approve updates only for a specific org/school, or you can approve it across the entire enterprise. So every school in the trust, really giving that flexibility.
Yeah, and I guess over and above that, right, there are some individuals that are or organizations that are a lot more risk averse. And in those scenarios, we've seen it, Sean, right, whereby they put critical servers in a separate organization completely, and endpoints themselves in a separate organization. So lots and lots to think about. And I guess the key here, Sean, is we give the options, right?
Exactly. And that's up to the teams to identify what makes the most sense for the way their school districts are laid out, and really kind of balance out, where do I sit from a risk standpoint? How do I want that to be handled? But yeah, the options are there. Now, if we go back to our automation section here, we're going to be able to, also control the reboot process. So if you want, you can have an automatic reboot be a part of the patching process only if it's required. So only if an update needs it. And you can show end users a prompt on their screen, so that way the reboots are taken care of in a proper manner. This reboot prompt, when it appears, you can brand this with your logo. And then the users are going to have two options. One, they can essentially come in and say, actually, I want to reboot now. right? Instead of waiting the 4 hours that is set here, or the 4 days, or if you're feeling particularly cruel that day, you could say 5 minutes. But essentially, they get to choose if they want to reboot now, or they can snooze this prompt and have it reappear based off a time frame they choose. They can say, okay, actually, I'm in the middle of something. Remind me in 15 minutes. Remind me in 2 hours. But at the end of this countdown, the system will forcefully reboot to make sure that updates are being installed. I'm sure as we're all aware, if we leave the reboot up to the end user, it unfortunately will never get done. So we do have to eventually set some kind of time frame. For those of you have end users that are really adverse to it, you can very easily say, okay, actually, you have 3 days to do your reboot. But at that point, it is unfortunately time to get that done, right? So you can give them a large chunk of time if you want. Now again, update rings, we are pairing these based off the next ring in line, right? Update ring 1 or ring 0 goes to ring 1, goes to ring 2. And as such, we can do update exclusions on a ring level and target the outer rings, ring 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And by doing this, we're very simply just saying, do not install this update on this ring, right? We're just excluding it from this ring and any rings moving forward. We have a checkbox here that turns off automatic Windows updates, just puts Action 1 in control of the update process. And then from here, we will target our groups that we have created. In this instance, patching group A is my first target because it's my first update ring. And then I can schedule this. You can schedule this based off current endpoint time or local endpoint time. Granted, in education, it's probably all going to be in one time zone, so this should be fine. And then you can run this as frequently or as infrequently as you'd like. It's very flexible. And then the final thing of note is this misscheduled retry window. Basically, what this is designed to do is tell Action 1 how long to run something for. Essentially, we can tell Action 1, yes, run updates on Monday at 6 p.m. This probably isn't a great time, though, because a lot of endpoints are not going to be reachable. But what we can do is tell Action 1 to actually run this for up to 7 days, as an example. And as long as the device turns on within 7 days in this example, it will still receive updates. It won't be missing any patches. Now, the other way to look at this window that we set is to shorten it. And the way that I like to describe this is, let's say we're doing server patching at midnight, and we want this to be done at 6 a.m. By shortening this window to 6 hours, Action 1 is going to make sure that when 6 a.m. hits, patches will be deployed. And then when they are deployed and it hits that 6-hour limit, any patches that are still underway will be stopped and that system will be put into production use. Okay, let's talk about then the next update ring in line. And then from there, it kind of becomes a rinse and repeat. Update ring 1 is going to then just reference the prior results of update ring 0. It's going to use all the same configuration settings. Nothing's going to change. But instead, what's going to be different in terms of the deployment process is we look at the success rate. Was that patch successful? Did it fail? Are we seeing some fail, some succeed? And based off this information, you can tell Action 1, only deploy out to my next group of systems if we're at least 80, 90, 100% successful on the patches we are deploying. And it has to also successfully be deployed out to at least 50, 500, 5,000 devices. This way, Action 1 is basically doing a lot of the checking for you on if these applications and updates actually install or not. And if so, can we move forward? We're taking some of that weight off your shoulders. And if something does go wrong with a patch, you can still come in here and just do an exclusion. And this will exclude this for this update ring and any update rings down the line. So it's very easy to just insert in a exclusion for that purpose. And then you can also put in a delay window between the rings as well. So let's say you're working with some very sensitive software and you want to give the end users time for testing. You could put in a 5-day window, a 10-day window, whatever time frame you want. You can make a point of having that buffer window in place. Okay, let's switch back over to our presentation here. I'm actually going to put Drew on the spot for this slide. Drew, can you speak to this content here?
Yeah, this slide was really built in there to just show the level of adoption now we're getting across the education market. It's very, very clear patch management's hugely important now more than ever. For the benefit of everybody on the call, today we're helping approximately 500 in educational institutions manage their endpoint environments utilizing Action One. And what we've done is collated a list of a few that we feel are really, really great customers, more so than anything, and have given us their permission to be able to share their logos. So the likes of Bolton College, a large trust in the UK, TCAT, the Colonel's Academy Trust, Ted Ragg Trust, Seed Learning Partnership. You can see some comments there in regards to how our product is perceived, or solution, sorry, is perceived from the IT directors over there. Now, we've got a variety of additional customers. And again, more than happy to kind of introduce or talk to you about customers that may be in a similar situation to yourselves. If you're not quite sure if Action One's the right solution for you, I'd by all means ask you to please connect with us after today's discussion. We're happy to kind of just go through a little bit more information for you.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you, Drew. And then just real quick, a couple more slides, and we'll have the last 5 minutes for just general Q&A. We have some useful links: GitHub, Discord, Reddit. Definitely take some time, check these out. The Discord in particular is quite active. And then also we have one final piece here. If anyone is interested in signing up, and actually I'm going to throw this one over to you, Drew. I'm going to rest my voice for a moment.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah. Yes, guys. Look, first of all, Action One offer the first 200 endpoints for free forever, just the same as if you were a subscribed customer. There only is one difference, and that's the support capabilities. For our free customers, the support capabilities are effectively community-based support. Over and above that 200 endpoint count, we have a very, very simple pricing model where we charge per endpoint. And again, I'd ask you to reach out directly, as we have various different bandings in terms of those prices. And again, I'd be happy to have those discussions on a one-to-one basis. And we're also running a switch to Action One promo at the moment, whereby we'll add any existing months from your existing patch management solution to your Action One contract at no extra charge at all. You do have to present us with an invoice showing the competitive solution, and we'll be happy to honor that as well. Sean, we've got a couple of questions over in the chat over here. So I think, in terms of trying to address those, do you want to give those a stab, and then let me know if you want me to jump in?
Yeah. So let's take a look here. We have one question: how do you ensure that this platform is not compromised by threat actors? So first steps that we take, we always point out that we have both our ISO 27001 certificate and our I'm drawing a blank on the name, Drew.
SOC 2 Type 2.
SOC 2 Type 2. Sorry. So we have both those certificates in place, among many other security certs that we pride ourselves on, right? So we're basically following industry standard best practices in regards to security. If we look at it from the standpoint of your login itself, you can, of course, do email-based MFA, app-based MFA. You can do SSO providers of your own choosing. And then actually one thing that we are working on as well is actually re-architecturing the platform as a whole. So one thing we want to basically do is say, okay, actually, we're going to give all end users their own basically key, right, to their console, more or less. So that way, if something does happen to Action One, all of your devices are safe and secure. And that's something that we are actively working towards, where we really want to kind of pinpoint that. We notice that a lot of, tools in this space or any other spaces, honestly, that are cloud-based, seem to lack that, or at least, or they're not even working towards it, where we're making a very clear effort to add that additional layer of security and well-being, so that way if something does happen on our end, you're covered. You're going to be okay. Okay, another question. Are there any best practices on deployment to segregate the endpoints? That's probably going to fall into the organization area that we discussed. One thing we did not mention, each organization is going to be, it's going to have its own agent installer. So when you install those systems, they will go to the correct organization. And then from there, you can group those systems based off the needs that you have for them. So organizations and grouping are going to really be your best friends when it comes to separating out those systems based off need and criteria and patching or whatever else you're trying to accomplish, on top of the various attributes that you can use as well. What privileges does the agent on the endpoint use to install apps in the background? That's a great question. So Action One is going to be running as a system user to be able to facilitate update deployments, application deployments, script executions, all those various functions. And as such, of course, when you install the agent, you're going to need to make sure that there is having level permissions when you install the agent itself. But after that, it can run any of the actions that you need it to execute from that point forward. Okay, great question. I think that is what we have on the questions side at this point in time. We're happy to take any other questions anybody has. Feel free to put those into the Q&A section. We can definitely facilitate those. Anything else you want to add, Drew?
Yeah, really, I guess a closing statement from myself, right? I'm conscious that, we're speaking to the education community here today. We're really doubling down kind of our focus around education. As a result, we're also attending the Schools and Academies show next week, May the 15th in London. So guys, myself and Sean will be there on the day with live demonstrations. Please feel free to come and speak to us. Approach us, ask any questions that you may have. We'll be glad to speak to you and assist as best as we can. I think I'm hoping now from I guess more so from a closing statement, you've enjoyed today's discussion. We really do appreciate your time and engagement here today. Hopefully it gave you a clear view of how Action 1 can help simplify patch management, strengthen security, and ultimately save time, especially in those education environments. If you'd like to explore Action 1 further, we'd love to connect for a one-to-one discussion. Please feel free to reach out to me. Rick, of course, will share our information following this webinar. So again, please feel free to reach out to us. Last of all, go ahead to the Action 1 website and just sign up for the free 200 endpoints and just see what all the hype's about. Thank you very much for all of your time. Back to you, Rick.
Excellent.
Thank you. I hope everyone got something out of that and enjoyed it. As I said before, the webinar was recorded. We'll get that shared tomorrow. The feedback survey is live on the portal. Please do be as open as you can on there. There's some questions at the end in case you want to share your information to hear back from Action 1. We don't share your details otherwise, as we always promise. But that's it from me. Thank you again to Sean and Drew. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, ANME members.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.